These days, every job is a technology job. Whether you're a programmer, a marketer, or even just someone who sits down in front of a computer every day, you have a stake in the tapestry of the technology industry. Welcome to Wits and Wisdom, a podcast sharing insights, innovations, and inspiration from the award-winning Women in Tech Summit. Join host Gloria Bell, founder of the Women in Tech Summit, multi-hyphenate entrepreneur, and advocate for equity and equality in tech as she sits down with extraordinary guests from the Wits community. Listen in as they discuss wisdom from their career journeys, pro tips from their areas of expertise, and sneak previews of the biggest upcoming tech trends. This is Wits and Wisdom, a podcast from the Women in Tech Summit and Inspiring Tech Foundation.
We are back again live at Wits Northeast with Grace Francisco, one of our speakers. And Grace has a long and very impressive resume that includes positions at Microsoft, Cisco, Atlassian, and currently she is the CMO and head of developer relations at Pangea, which is the first security platform as a service. Your career sure covers a wide range of tech companies and positions, and I want to dig into your journey a little bit, Grace. I'm so glad you're able to join us again.
Thank you for having me.
I listed a bunch of companies you worked for. Let's talk about some of your favorite roles that you've occupied over the course of your career.
Oh, goodness, favorite. I think they were all my favorite in the point in time that I was actually doing each role. I tell my mentees this all the time, which is you spend the vast majority of your life at work. So ideally, you're finding the thing that's going to keep you engaged and excited and growing. And I'm not saying happy specifically because not every day at work is going to be a happy day. There are going to be challenges to get through and growing to do. And so for every role that I had, that was my favorite at that point in time. And I mentioned this in my talk earlier today. I have had an accidental career. I have just followed my calling everywhere that I went. And so I have name brands, but they weren't always name brands. So Roblox is one of my favorite companies that I worked at. And I loved my work at Microsoft as well. But with every company and every role, it created new opportunities for me to continue learning, to continue to really push myself beyond my comfort zone. And I think that's where a lot of people still have the opportunity to recognize that part of learning is swimming in that discomfort. Now, I'm unusual because I swim in discomfort all the time, and I've just accepted that because I'm someone who likes to do a lot of rapid learning, and I like to move at a fairly fast clip because I love my work, I love community, I love working with developers. And when I was a developer, I loved coding. I don't get to code as much anymore, but I live vicariously through my developer community friends, and that's still good for me.
Which is an excellent segue into something I'm very curious about. So you are one of the few experts in developer relations. So I'm not sure many of our listeners really know what that is. So I'd love if you could tell them what it is and why there are so few experts.
Developer relations kind of stemmed out of this need in the early, I'd say about 2000s, where tech companies recognized a need to have technologists who could go out and speak on behalf of the company and the products and get technical people, engineers excited, engaged, interested in adopting, especially those early versions of those products. And back in those days, we were called evangelists. Now, I got this big smile on my face about that term because for a good 8 years while I was at Microsoft and I carried this title of developer evangelist, I was traveling the world and I would get on planes and I would explain to someone my role, and the first reaction I'd get would be this sort of weird looking reaction, and I would have to say, no, not the religious kind. Let me explain to you what a developer evangelist is. We are technical people who go out in the world, present, we write a lot of technical content, and we help people really understand why they should try this technical product or tool and how that will help them in their day and how that will help them to better facilitate innovation and technology adoption.
I think that really gives everybody a much clearer understanding and hopefully opens some people's eyes to what a great role it might be, and maybe it's a good fit for them. So thank you so much for explaining that. So there's another part of your journey that I'm really curious about, in that you ended up getting a developer job. Not only did you not have a degree, but you didn't have a degree in computer science. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to this. So I'd love you to tell us how that happened, how you made that decision, and kind of where you've gone from there.
I will be honest, that was not an intentional thing that I did. Life happens, and so that was all very organic. I had a very difficult upbringing, and I left home when I was 17. I actually accelerated my high school education. I finished that in 3.5 years, left home at 17, and then spent the next 10 years basically working full-time and going to school at night and on weekends, because back in those days, we didn't have these online courses and online certificates and degrees you can get today. And so I spent a lot of money on books, expensive university books and other tech books, to learn both formally in college as well as informally, because the other thing that was fairly new was computer science offerings in universities was relatively new back then. No one grew up thinking, I'm going to become a software developer. Certainly not, I'm going to grow up and become a developer evangelist. That was not a thing. That's still not a thing today. But I honestly didn't actually really, truly know what I wanted to be back then. And it took a couple more years of me actually working, and I landed a role actually as an admin assistant at a little software startup that was based in Boston, but it had a little satellite office in San Francisco. And there I got to observe all of these programmers and the work that they were doing. And I thought, okay, that's what I want to go and do. And so that's how I fell into this track of becoming a programmer first. And I was relatively self-taught. In fact, the first time that I had a formal role as a programmer, I had just recently taken on a tech support role. And in that tech support role, I had time between calls, and I taught myself Lotus Script, which is this very little known scripting language. Just like for some people might remember, Visual Basic or VB Script was used for Office products. Lotus Script was the equivalent for Lotus Smart Suite. I would do this in between calls, sometimes use them on my calls with people who wanted help with customization. And I became the expert in Lotus Script. Nobody knew how to use Lotus Script. I was hacking away at it. And also learned Java, which was relatively new back then, as well as HTML and JavaScript, also fairly new back then. So I was very much self-taught. And that went to my benefit in being able to craft a career around that, because lo and behold, a few months later, there was a role that opened up that needed someone that had Lotus Script experience. Guess what? I was the only person that raised their hand for that role.
So from that, I would take that you would encourage somebody, if they have an opportunity to learn, and even if it meant they have to be self-taught, take the opportunity that they can learn to code. Anybody can learn to code.
Really, in today's society where we are surrounded by tech, I look at programming as an essential skill for most modern day workers, as going to be the lingua franca of business. I think it is an enabler, and it's a very empowering enabler to have some sense for what coding and scripting can be like. I still genuinely remember that feeling, that just genuinely good feeling of building something and running it and going, I built that. I built that pride. And so I love saying that when my kids are doing projects. I love saying that when other people share with me what they've recently built. I think it's just an incredible, rewarding experience.
This is something you and I share. I actually taught myself to code at 40. So great advice. So the other thing that we also share, both as individuals and obviously from the Wits perspective, is this being very passionate advocates for diversity in tech. I know you do a lot of work and you do a lot of speaking up for diversity. And was there a point in your career where you said, this is something that is really important to me, I need to be the one to do this? Or was it just something that happened all along?
Most of us are familiar with the fact that in computer science and programming, as a woman, it can be very isolating because most of your team is going to be men, and that is a deterrent for a lot of women. I was a little clueless going into all of it. I didn't notice the difference. I felt like we're all the same. We're all just kind of hanging out and coding together. It wasn't until I got married and then became pregnant with my first child that I realized, oh, wait, no, I'm not just one of the guys. I'm not just one of the boys. And I'm getting treated really differently now because I'm about to be a mother. just by happenstance, someone had reached out to me in the office campus and said, oh, we're going to do this Women in Tech thing. You want to come? I said, well, sure. Why not? It was just lunch, and it was very unstructured. It was a small table. I think we were 10 people at the time. And by that point in time in my career, I'd spent a lot of time working with developers and developer communities and building communities. I started giving some thoughts and ideas on what to do to build our Women in Tech community, which of course then put me in a position of being invited to, of course, join the board and do something about it. And so thus became my side initiatives around women in tech and diversity, because in those discussions and in that participation of that community and building that community, I heard many, many other voices and experiences of other women who felt excluded, who felt unheard, who felt underappreciated, who weren't rewarded. And that really drove the point home for me of things that I just didn't see for myself until the point in time in which I was becoming different because I was becoming a mother. And that's when I started to experience that difference the most. And so it helped me to really understand what women had been talking about around me the whole time that I was clueless about. So it helped me build empathy for other women that I wasn't personally recognizing until I found myself in that same sort of space and feeling that like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it now. I need to be with other women who also get it and to have a conversation around how are we going to fix this now? And so that was my first involvement. And that was my days at Microsoft, just sitting with other women and building a community around that. And I was a chair for that board, the Silicon Valley board, for I think 5 or 6 years. And I was that passionate about it and really built an incredible network of other women, many of whom I actually still keep in touch with today. And they have gone on to become very influential and amazing leaders in other places, other companies. And so I really respect them and appreciate that time that we had building that community together.
So we are so excited that you were joining us to speak here at Wits Northeast, and wonderful presentation this morning. And I know you have a wealth of speaking experience. What do you consider the intersection between your passion for tech, speaking? Like, how does that all come together for you?
I was actually not always the most comfortable speaker on stage. In fact, my first experiences doing any public presentations was when I was a sales engineer at SC. And many of my meetings were presentations in front of very small groups of people. But then we landed this one meeting that had over 30 people, and it was a very large room. And I became very anxious, and I started to shake. My voice was shaking. My body was like physically shaking in front of 30 people. And I somehow managed to get through the entire presentation and technical demo, despite the fact that I was shaking. And I'm sure people that were watching were thinking, is she going to pass out? Is she going to fall down? But I made it through. And the most remarkable thing about that was how generous everyone was in that audience. That so many of them came up to me and said, you did a wonderful job. I learned so much. And that gave me this perspective of, wait a minute, actually, a lot of those people were probably thinking if they were in my shoes, they would be just as nervous. They were being really incredibly empathetic and understanding this human condition of feeling potentially rejected, feeling like you're not good enough. And that helped me continue this journey of getting more comfortable. And people will tell you it takes several talks, just going through it and going through emotions and continuing to present to get to a place where you do feel comfortable and feel much more natural in speaking out in public. And I remember a friend of mine, I thought she was such a great presenter. Her name's Sally. And she was such a natural presenter. And I said, Sally, how do you do that? How do you keep all that stuff in your head? And Sally's guidance was the best. She said, don't memorize scripts. It will totally feel unnatural. And what you need to do is just look at the slides and think about the 3 main things that you want to get across from that slide. No more. Don't try to memorize every single word. Just what are those main topics on that slide? And it shouldn't be any more than 3 that you want to get across. And if you've gotten the 3 things across, then you've done what you need to. And if you forget something, no one will know. It's okay. And so I have found joy much more recently in being on stage and sharing my stories, and that intersection of my personal passions about leadership, getting more women in tech, I love that I can now be comfortable on stage, share those stories, and have this call to action to other women I see in the audience to say, please, you take your turn. Come up on the stage at some point and share your wisdom, share your experiences. Because when the younger generations of people coming in don't see us on stage, women, people of color, people of different heritage, they're not going to feel comfortable joining us. We need to be present. We need to be visible. And it does take courage, but that courage will take you very far because it also opens amazing doors.
We were talking about visibility, and you did mention visibility as a woman of color. And we're also talking a little bit about impact in your speaking and how you want to be able to encourage other people, especially other women, to get up and be visible. And how do you feel that your rise through the ranks in technology, your willingness to be visible, to get out there and speak, to be a thought leader, how do you feel it has had an impact on the industry? Or how would you like to, when people look at Grace and think about Grace, what is the impact that you would like to have had?
I think if I have in any way helped one person from my talk feel that they belong, that they have opportunity, that they can rise into leadership, that they can have positive change, that means a lot to me. Because with every person that I can touch with the words, with my perspectives, with my lessons learned in life, in my career, and encouraging them to move forth in a very constructive way, that makes me feel like, okay, this has meaning. The time I spent in building my content, sharing my content, practicing my content, making sure that the storytelling is authentic and just right so that it's digestible by other people. It's worth it. It's just worth it to know that other people can follow behind me and with me and alongside me. And if they surpass me, I'm even that much more proud in sharing this story. I have a lot of people in my network who reach out to me, and I always tell them, I can't wait to see you rise up. And if you pass me, you're going to hire me, right? That's my end goal, is to see everyone flourish around me. And I think for me and people like me, it's not just that I'm a woman of color in tech. There are some other just basic things. I'm a petite woman. Most people in leadership, on average, there's a lot of research on this, are tall, white male. So I have a lot of things going against me. And I continue to just barrel forward because it's important. Because it's important for me, it's important for our industry to have representation. The solutions we build depend on that diversity. We need to be part of the design, the architecture, security. I was talking in my talk earlier today about security and how women are so uniquely positioned to help solve that problem of designing code to be more secure, applications to be more secure by default from the very beginning, because we have lived most of our lives with security in mind. When we go out late at night and we're on our own, we know we need to take extra precautions. When we're out on the internet, we have to take extra precautions. It's something like 78% of us have had some sort of like cyber attack, specifically targeting women. And so we have that as something that I hope that most women don't take as a, oh no, but more of a, oh, I have laser vision as a result of this. I am strong. I am fierce. I'm going to use my superpowers for good to help shape what we're doing, to change the culture of how we build applications and innovate, to ensure that we only create safe and secure applications for our end users. I think that's important.
I think that's hugely important. And I think that's a great message for our listeners to hear. We all have an opportunity. And if we are all willing to be a part of the solution, then the solutions will come. Grace, thank you so much. Where can our listeners get in touch with you?
That's pretty easy according to my kids. If you Google my name, you'll pretty easily land on my LinkedIn profile and also my Twitter profile. I'm always happy to hear from folks on either one of those platforms.
And Grace, This has been so wonderful getting a chance to chat with you again and really getting to dive into all of this wonderful information that you've been sharing with our listeners. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again for being a speaker here at Wits and sitting down and really getting to talk with me.
My pleasure. It was really great being able to be here and speaking with you about these topics.
So thank you all to everyone who has been joining us here on Wits and Wisdom, and hopefully we will get to see some of you at one of our upcoming summits. You can find more information at womenintechsummit.com, and we will see you on the next Wits and Wisdom.
Ready to learn more about the Women in Tech Summit? Visit our website at womenintechsummit.net. That's womenintechsummit.net to view our most up-to-date event schedules, calls for speakers, and sponsorship opportunities. If you enjoyed this episode, bookmark the show, give us a follow, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us educate, inspire, and connect with even more movers and shakers within and beyond the technology industry. Thanks for listening, and see you here again soon on Wits and Wisdom, a podcast from the Women in Tech Summit and the Inspiring Tech Foundation.